I want to start the conversation by really exploring the rural people and places that these folks can tell us about specifically. I mentioned before, there's a lot of misperceptions, maybe stereotypes about rural people and places that are common not only in our mainstream media and dominant culture, but like really are embedded in a lot of the culture and strategy in our progressive movement spaces. And these misperceptions, range from benignly incorrect to mean-spirited and unkind and damaging to our efforts to actually build trust and build people power. So I'd love to start by asking our three folks on the panel who live in rural states just to tell us more about what is your rural place and people like, and what does the progressive movement get wrong or not understand that you wish that people knew?
Yeah, so I'm in North Carolina, and I've been organizing in rural spaces across the South for a little over a decade now. And there's a lot, the rural South, of course, is very big, right? We're talking about rural coastal plains and swamps. We're talking about the huge swath of the sort of Piedmont regions, which is sweet potatoes and tobacco and farm, and a lot of really small towns and small cities, sort of rurally placed small cities. And then, of course, Appalachia, which is very close to my heart. And there's a lot of stereotypes that are told or about the rural South, right? I am sort of stereotypically the rural South. I am a white woman who drives a fairly large truck, and I appreciate things like drinking beer in the creek. As would all of y'all if you had experienced it. Yes, West Virginia, yes. But the rural South, and maybe in particular Appalachia, is used as shorthand for critique, and especially a political critique. And we saw it really come to rise in the last decade, though it's been there for quite a long while. There's stereotypes about the rural South and Appalachia that are about sort of being dumb and backwards, right? And these are perpetuated through media, sort of the honey boo boo category of pop culture, television. Or sometimes we're even painted as sort of nefarious, dangerous, and inbred. I cannot tell you the damage that the movie Deliverance did to the hills and hollers that my family calls home. And even within our movement spaces, this translates over, where we're often talking about these red areas, these backwards places, these places where people are uneducated, and we're talking about them as if they're all white, which is really wild to you if you've ever spent any time in a place like Hertford County, North Carolina. The rural South is actually incredibly Black. There's a historical reason for that, that people seem to overlook. But we still hold that. I was talking to a good friend of mine, a very progressive person, and she was heading out to the Outer Banks of North Carolina to go to the beach, which is a great place to head if you can. And she said, well, I'm going to make sure I fill up all my gas in Raleigh, because who knows what's out there on that 3-hour drive through rural North Carolina to get to the beach. And I thought to myself, who knows what's out there? You should probably stop, because you're going to get some of the best damn biscuits you've ever tasted in your life. But also, that's the Black Belt of North Carolina. There's an entire stretch of counties that are majority Black, and they're all rural. If you look at our 100-county voter map, any election, you'll see a swath that is blue. And if you watch it year over year, it's trending red. It's not because a bunch of racist white people are moving there. It's because we are losing people in the places that we should absolutely always have them. North Carolina is also, or the rural South is also increasingly brown. There's places like Siler City, North Carolina, where the entire town was saved by immigration about 20 years ago. Siler City would not have a grocery store if it were not for immigrant communities coming in and spending money. They also now have a Walmart, which I know doesn't sound amazing to folks, but if you live in a rural place, having a Walmart can make your town sort of the center of activity, and is a big deal. Yeah. And then the rural South is also just very gay, and you're going to mostly have to just take my word for that. But, there's a long tradition, but instead of recognizing these qualities of the rural South, we're often talked about as this castaway and hopeless place. I cannot tell you how many of my friends and family that are progressive say, why don't you move? After every election, people say, you could come stay with me in my awesome cabin in Vermont. And I do want to stay in your cabin in Vermont. But I don't want to leave this place that has this deep history of not only this incredible diversity, but also incredible promise around organizing. The rural South is who gave you both Dolly Parton and Fannie Lou. And to ignore that past and that history and those contributions, to ignore the organizing in southern West Virginia and the rednecks who fought at Blair Mountain and in Matewan, to ignore the organizing that was happening in Lowndes County, Alabama, with voter registration that really launched the Black Power movement, to ignore the newspaper editors in Tabor City, North Carolina, who went head to head with the Klan and exposed their multi-state ring in the 1950s and got them all arrested and prosecuted for their crimes. Is a real disservice to our legacy, and to perpetuate the stereotypes tells my child, my white son, that he doesn't have any legacy to live up to when he absolutely does. And so those are some of the things that frustrate me.
Yes. Hell yeah. Gwen, can I get a twinkle fingers for drinking beer in a creek? Yeah. Double tap to that. Erika, I'd love to kick it to you. I'd love to, if you'd tell us a little bit about Nevada and your experience of that place and your work there.
Sure. And I have to start by saying, you said it right this last time, but I personally don't care. But if I don't call out that Nevada is Nevada and not Nevada, then somebody else is going to see it and they're going to say, so you didn't even say anything.
Thank you, Nevada. Thank you.
The same way, I think, people take pride in their space. Nevadans really take pride in being from Nevada. And I'm not originally from there, but I was welcomed in, and it made it home. And that's our motto: home means Nevada. And the thing I think that is most unknown about Nevada is that when you think of it, you think of Las Vegas. And so, which is the county seat, which is the largest populated area in the state. And it's all the way at the bottom. And then you have Reno, which is all the way at the top in the corner. And then you have this vast space in the middle. And so what's there? Small towns, some ghost towns, Area 51, so maybe some aliens, not sure. But there's a lot of farmers, a lot of middle of Nevada is green. We're not a complete desert. And there are pockets of Latino populations more than anything, especially in a place called West Wendover that is closer to the Utah border. So the east side of the state at the top corner. And it is also run on gaming the same way the majority of the state really depends on gambling and prostitution. But what we have are these spaces where organizations like mine or other nonprofit organizations that are organizing folks around issues aren't able to reach and get to, because it's not easy, right? It's not easy to get across the mountains. It's not easy to go through some of these towns that are not as friendly as others to reach them. And so what happens, that they are sort of left off to their own. And I think that makes them feel, and this is me projecting because we've only spent a very, very small amount of time in any spaces outside of Clark County where Las Vegas is for our organization. But from conversations I've had with mayors of some of these towns is that they feel like no one cares. No one is listening to what they need or who they are as people, and they have an assumption of who they are. And so without proper funding, without us being able to spend build long-term relationships with these folks, they're never going to trust us because we're flying in and, talking about their problems. Like, you don't start any relationship with talking about somebody's problems, right? Like, that's not how you make friends. So how do you make friends with folks, is to, sit down and have a cup of coffee, have some beer at the creek, that's what you have to do first. And if we're able to spend some time and build up and understand, how they live, how they want to live, and what their version of the American dream looks like, then we're able to help advocate for that with them. And specifically, I mentioned West Wendover because I was alarmed when I first found out that there were so many women having babies on the side of the road there, because the nearest birthing center was in Salt Lake City. And so I believe that was about 90 miles or so. And so when I first heard it, it was from the former mayor there. And he was so like, yeah, it just happens. My sister, she gave birth on the side of the road, and, and I think, my cousin, and, just, it happens quite often. And I'm like, that's not okay. Like, that's not how anyone wants to give birth. So we talked about, were there midwives, were there doulas, were there birth centers? Where can women go to have access to some sort of care if you don't have a full-time facility there? And he's like, we just can't afford it, because when we talked about bringing in a medical facility, we couldn't promise them that there was going to be enough revenue. So there wasn't going to be enough sickness, enough death, enough whatever, in order to keep a medical facility there. And so bringing life in the world is just not lucrative enough, I guess. So we have worked on bills at the state level to have doulas be reimbursed through Medicaid. And then for doulas that work in rural areas, that they got bonuses for working in rural areas. So these are ways that we are trying to reach folks, even if we can't physically reach them, to try to have some sort of policies that will help them from afar.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Erika. Adrienne, tell us a little bit about Idaho.
Well, welcome everyone. Yeah, I mean, there literally isn't enough time to talk about how much the progressive movement gets wrong about rural. And it's a conversation that we absolutely need to have. As Gwen was talking, I was thinking, these places that we come from, Idaho, Texas, North Carolina, Nevada, right? It's sort of become code for red, rural, and racist, right? And so we need to understand, I think, first and foremost, that the people living in these areas are not monoliths, but we treat them as though they are. And we act in a binary that is absolutely part of the authoritarian playbook: good versus bad, right versus wrong. I mean, you were talking about, theater and, movies and that kind of culture. I mean, the term basket of deplorables, we will never forget, right? Because most people are living with the sense that that is how they have been cast and that they can never break out of it. And that's really important to understand. The other part, I think, is the progressive movement also has made a calculation to go the path of least resistance, right? We're going to go and we're going to talk to the people that we believe are persuadable, and everybody else who live in these rural areas are somehow seen as not worth the investment and also irredeemable, right? That if they voted for Trump, then clearly there's something inherently wrong about them. Now, it always surprises people to hear that Idaho actually had the largest Democratic caucus in the history of the US for Bernie Sanders. When I was driving there, I was blown away. The streets were filled with people. They had to open up several more arenas. And then when Sanders didn't get the nomination, all of those folks voted for Trump. Why? Because when you're living in circumstances that are not serving you, then when somebody comes along, whether they are genuine or not, comes along and says, I'm going to break that up, it probably sounds pretty good. So I think the other thing that people don't understand about rural folks is that there are structural failures, systemic failures that people have been living with for generations. And their hurt and their pain is deeply entrenched in those lived realities. They are not the same for everyone everywhere. But there's fundamentally something that unifies most people that we've talked to across 12 states in this country, which is that the system is broken. And I'm always struck by this lack of faith, that it's like we've forgotten how to dream together because we don't believe in the dream anymore, right? And we're not reaching people at their core values. Those things that are really driving and underpinning the choices that they make when it comes to politics. So the other thing I would say is that it's a huge problem in this country and in organizing spaces that we treat this as a project that if we just get the right policy, if we just have the right message, we're going to be able to turn these folks, they're going to become part of our coalition, right? And the reality is that we need to build the cultural and social conditions that lead to the political outcomes that we want. It doesn't work the other way around. Every time we've had conversations with folks and we say, we've been organizing on healthcare, for example, or something like that, faith in those systems and those solutions is so low that we end up in the progressive movement end up coming off as an apparatus or an appendage of the Democratic Party, a party that they believe has failed them, and they're not wrong, right? When we talk to people about what hurts, what would really make a difference for you and your family and your community, and we engage people where they are, one of the first things we often hear is, no one from your side has ever asked me what I think or feel before, right? And so it's not that these places aren't part of our political equation and must be, because frankly, we are not building base, we're losing base. We're losing base in these places where they have been strongholds for a very long time. But we're not providing an invitation for people to be part of something. And the last thing I'll say, and this has been a real eye-opening experience for me, and one that has been painful. Sitting in movement spaces where we've been talking about how would we organize for this moment, knowing that it was coming for such a long time, and feeling like maybe are we just talking, these groups talking past each other when we're talking about democracy? I'm looking at Rinku, are we using the wrong words? Until it finally occurred to me after years of having these conversations that perhaps we're not. Perhaps we are working in such an atmosphere of purity tests, right? That it isn't that I don't believe in democracy. I believe in democracy, but only for the people that I want sitting at my table. And we provide this utopian version of what democracy is, which it is not. It is not. Democracy is about people coming together across difference, across experience, to find themselves in a shared struggle, to identify the needs and the ways that they can work together to create solutions that aren't being dictated by either political party or a system that has writ large failed them. That is democracy. And so I think that's a lot, but I think those are some of the things that are really diminishing our ability as a movement to be in this moment and be effective against what is, we cannot underestimate. Authoritarianism is here. It is here. And how we choose to maneuver will will result in whether or not we collectively survive or if we collectively fail.
Yeah. Thanks, Adrienne. Yeah. I want to go to Rinku next, and I want to pull this thread that you just brought in of, we spend a lot of time sort of like agonizing over just getting the message right and how a message is distinct from an actual authentic, welcoming invitation. And so, Rinku, I'd love if you'd talk a little bit from a narrative perspective. I've heard you say before that we can't bring a message to a deep narrative fight. So what have you learned, or what have y'all learned at Narrative Center about how do we extend that invitation so that we can actually build trust and rapport and power with people in rural places?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm really happy to be on this panel. I run an intermediary called Narrative Initiative, and my background is like 40 years in racial justice organizing and different kinds of media work. And what we do at Narrative Initiative, as Rachel mentioned in my bio, is help movements think about how to make what kind of power it's going to take to make their values and ideas the central values and ideas of the society, because everything comes down from the central shared values of the society. So if you're in a society that thinks of, holds a rugged individualism value, then your policies, your social norms, your what happens in schools, everything is going to push people toward thinking that kind of isolationist hyper individualism is the way to do well. So the big difference between strategic communications, which is what most of our campaigning operations engage in, and a narrative strategy, one big difference is the amount of time you have to carry the thing out. So in strategic communications, because we're trying to win elections, we're trying to get legislation passed or stopped, there is a short timeline. In a short timeline, you just don't, we as a movement, we don't have the resources to to change values in that short timeline. If you only have 3 months, how are you going to change a 400-year value of rugged individualism? So that's what I mean when funders and also activists and organizers say, oh, I did narrative for 2 years and things didn't change. It's because they didn't do narrative. They did strategic communications. Mm-hmm. They looked for a words that work memo and they tried to just repeat the words. And that's really valuable work. It's important that we have that kind of immediate, what do people think about X piece of policy testing and feedback. But in the short term, you have to navigate the values people already hold most deeply and most widely. In the long term is where you can try to reshape those values, take over individualism and turn it into autonomy, personal autonomy. We like that. We don't like rugged, toxic individualism, but we like to have control over our bodies and our lives. So you can redefine an idea, but it takes time and it takes kind of everybody working in the direction of that redefinition through the policy changes we demand, through the people we organize, through the culture that we build in our communities and in our organizations. So short-term, long-term, both are important. You can't carry out a long-term narrative strategy without doing anything right now. We don't just think, you have to do things. But really trying to be clear about what our interventions of the moment are geared toward. Are we trying to win a piece of legislation? Are we trying to introduce a new idea? Are we trying to prevent the worst from happening? Are we trying to organize new people? The size and timeline of your goal needs to have a narrative timeline that is realistic for it. So I hope that's helpful. And I want to just mention one example from our work. So in 2020, after January 6th, we became part of the 22nd Century Initiative, and which grew out of a set of friends, old in all the ways, friends who are old in all the ways, trying to figure out what are we to do now? What is this? fresh hell, and what are we supposed to do? So long story short, Narrative Initiative built a working group, a pro-democracy working group, and with the idea that that working group would figure out what a long-term intervention could be, how we would block the immediate threats, but build a better system. And I use words like build rather than rebuild, imagine rather than reimagine, because if we're gonna like not have this be the limitation, the constraint of what we ask for, then we can't be rebuilding or reimagining. We just have to start and do it. So over time, that pro-democracy working group, it struggled like to figure out how to be helpful. But over time, it has become a rural urban unity working group. And because we decided that's like where we can intervene. We can intervene and change that set of ideas among progressives, and we can intervene and change it in the larger society. So we've been publishing a series of case studies about rural and urban people working on their common issues. They have common struggles, common solutions, they take common actions, and they actually share quite a bit of common culture. Like, where do you think city people came from? And where do you think they go when they have to visit family? And where do rural people go when they have to go to the doctor? They go to the city. So there's a lot of commonality there. And so we never say the word divide. Unless we're blaming someone for creating the divide. It's always unity, connection, bridge, community, common. You could go to our website, just look up case studies. You'll see the first couple. I'm happy to talk about any of the specific lessons from those, but organizing is how we make the commonality real.
If I can just to really emphasize, because Rinku is much too humble to say, for decades has been so instrumental in shaping the way that we think about our movement work and the way that we talk about our movement work. I'm curious, there are many people who are presenting here, and who are presenting across the country who've been talking about block and build. And it was Rinku and Rinku's group that approached all of us in movement work to say, no, this is the frame. We must block and build. And so just to say that it's like take every word, because it really is such an important framing and has helped us move through really important moments in the past too.
Thank you, Adrian. It's sweet of you.
Yeah, thank you both. And Rinku, some threads I'm starting to hear, like that the work takes time, that this is long-term work. And you also brought up this emphasis on what do we have in common? Mm-hmm. And so with that, I want to turn back to you, Adrian, to tell us more about this conversation methodology that was developed in Idaho and how it's being used in communities in rural and conservative places across the country.
Yeah. So Idaho, for those of you who don't know, was once home of the Aryan Nation. And we have seen over the last 6-7 years, just a doubling, tripling of authoritarian groups in the state. And, it's always been, not always been the case, but for the last 20 years has been the case that it's been a Republican trifecta. We are no longer a Republican trifecta. We have been completely taken over by the far right. Republicans who once held office do not have power. And those who are serving literally come out on the State House steps, make public statements saying it was never enough for that to be the case. Idaho will become the new Aryan Nation state. Right? So 30 years of organizing in this political climate really dictated the work that we do, because you have to organize in the places that you are. And so we had launched a rural organizing campaign going to the places that were being radicalized and targeted, because it's no longer relegated to North Idaho, which is what it was at one point. It's much more widespread. And I would say across the United States, we need to understand that it's much more widespread than people really pay attention to. So that was wildly successful. And we were asking people what hurts, right? And we were doing community platforms and we were having great successes. And then we had COVID. And we knew that we needed to be reaching out. So we had access to a text-based program, but we wanted to really do something different, which was to tailor the technology, excuse me, that was available to reach people with the same authenticity. And so over 9 months, we reached out to people in the same way, one scripted question, but then we had peer-to-peer texting. So you're never given just a patent message, right? And over that period of time, we reached 1.4 million people in a state that at the time comprised 1.7 million. We had 789,000 conversations that stretched days and weeks at a time. And over that period, less than 1% of the people that we texted opted out. And it was really like, right? What happened? And so that really catapulted us into creating a national program to reach out to people again. This time, what we do is we wanted to, again, you remember I said like the path of least resistance? We went the opposite of that. So we use Southern Poverty Law Center hate mapping. We talk to local groups on the ground like Erika's and Gwen's, and we say, tell us what's real. Where are you seeing the threats? Where do you feel like you can't send organizers? Where's the opportunity? And they provide zip codes. And then we overlay that with predictive scoring that measures ethnic nationalist alignment. So what we did then was we coupled progressives with folks living in these areas with one question that's scripted. Our country may be more divided than it's ever been. What do you think is causing this? And then we have a 64-page searchable narrative guide, conversation guide, to help people pivot on any topic that they bring up. I think one of the things that makes us unique is that I believe in multi-issue organizing to the ends of my days. We have to be listening to people and taking their direction about what matters to them. But we also have to be training folks to do that kind of organizing, right? Too often we get caught in this script. Don't deviate from the script. Don't take more than 10 minutes. Don't go back to that door because you might taint the data. I mean, all of these things, right? And over the course of many, many years, we've allowed the fundamental skills of organizing to so atrophy that too many people who are doing this work literally do not know how to organize. And so, yes, ours, we call it authentic relational organizing, authentic relational conversations to deviate or to, delineate our practice from others, right? And it starts really with an invitation, which is, tell me what hurts. Tell me what would make a difference. And what we find, right, a lot of folks will say still to this day that the thing that drove people in these areas to vote for Trump were economic conditions. They were completely material conditions. Well, we've been at this 5 years. We've talked to people across 12 states. And what I will tell you is that whether it's Idaho, North Carolina, Georgia, or upstate New York, what we've found is that it is not that primarily. It is tribalism, right? It is, I feel a sense of community with the people who are talking to me. They are my people. They are for me. I trust them. I trust them to have my back when no one else will. Which isn't to say that material things don't come up, but is much, much, much later in the conversation. And rarely is it about a policy specific, right? It's about, I lost my parents to health because they didn't have health care. There was a baby that was born on the side of the road because we didn't have a clinic. These are the stories that we're hearing, but it's much more systemic than people understand, right? And yet we are failing to address those structures. People in these areas are hungry for that kind of change. They are ready for it. They want those kinds of conversations. But who's having those kinds of conversations with them? And right now, the predominant folks that are having those kinds of conversations with them, I mean, I will say that we are one of the only programs in the country that reaches out across extreme difference like this. The people who are having those conversations are authoritarian actors. And what they tell them is, you're right. Let's break it. Let's burn it all down. And they use their strife and their struggle to advance an agenda that is designed to burn it all down to their favor. To their favor. And that's what we need to really start talking about in this country, because there is an opportunity to have these conversations and to move powerful, powerful things. But first, we have to have the conversations.
Yeah, thank you, Adrienne. Adrienne started talking about some of the challenges that we have with door knocking. Do folks feel that a sense of like what we're doing on the doors like might not be it? So with that, I want to turn to you, Erika. And Make It Work Nevada is known for their really creative organizing and comms work. And so would just love to hear more about what y'all are up to. And specifically, I've heard you say a couple times that y'all help people identify for themselves what their American dream is. So I'd love to hear you talk more about both the work that you're doing and that particular frame.
Sure. I think for us, it starts out of a place of necessity, right? The majority of people that I have hired over the past decade have been Black and brown, and they have been very young. And Nevada is a stand your ground state. Nevada is a red state. It's not as blue or purple as anyone wants to say that it is on the outside. And it comes from a place of safety, right? And so knocking on strangers' doors, whether you're wearing, our t-shirt or not, doesn't mean that people will greet you warmly or even just say no thank you in a polite way, right? And so there were times in 2016 where we had canvassers had guns pulled out on them, and in 2018 same thing. And we hired some young boys, and some of them, they were even actually interested in the work. They were trying to understand politics, but also, they were very knuck if you buck. Like, if you gonna come at me, I'm coming at you. And I'm like, we can't do that. Like, that's not gonna work. You can't push back because someone pushed back at you. It's dangerous, what have you. And so around that time, I think it was around 2019, when I decided, I said, what would it look like if we started canvassing, riding the bus? And so what I know about the bus system in Las Vegas is that people only ride the bus out of necessity. No one really rides the bus in Las Vegas because they're trying to be green or whatever. It's because you have no other choice. And so that's also the folks we want to talk to, right? So why don't you have other choices? What are the issues with transportation, or what is the issues with your income level, whatever that is? And so what does it look like to also have a captive audience, because they're on the bus, that you can talk to them? They can't really run away, and they also are not allowed to have guns on the bus. So can we talk to folks that way and start it off, very gently, right? Like, how are you doing? And, small talk, that sort of thing. And if we're able to ride the bus long enough, people just start to get to know you, and they will have conversations with you. And so we've been doing this sporadically. First and foremost, is because no funder has really ever been all that interested in our bus canvassing, because it's like, you're not pulling turf, and you're not using van, and you don't know where they live exactly, and da-da-da-da-da. It's all these excuses as to why this is not the way, because it's not the way that you're used to, as opposed to this might be a way that might actually work, and it might actually keep some folks long term. And also, bus drivers know everything. They know what's going on all around the city. These are the people you want to talk to. And so these are the folks we want to build relationships with. And I think for us, it's just really important to meet people where they are, but also leave enough space for them to come to you a little bit, right? Like, you can't just be in someone's face all the time, knocking on their door, sending them mail, texting them, calling them, what have you. I also think that's just not working anymore. It's not working the same, and people are able to block you, and people are able to, opt out of the text messages and what have you, but they also feel, I think, just they're overwhelmed with all of this. And also the messaging is the same, and it all sounds diluted. And as you said, Adrian, like it is scripted, right? And that's not how you have conversations with anybody. We do not script our bus canvassing, except for when we were talking specifically about the abortion ballot measure that was on the ballot, but that was only scripted of what was there. So we make sure we got the language right. But other than that, there's no script to it. You can't script talk to someone. That's not interesting. Again, you can't make friends that way. If we just go back to organizing is about making friends. It's not voter mobilization. It's how do you make friends with people so they will trust you enough to tell you something that's vulnerable. Because also people don't want to say, I can't pay my light bill. People don't want to say, I don't have a car because it got repossessed. Because my husband's abusive, and because, my kid got kicked out of school and now I can't get them to school, or they got kicked out because I can't get them to school on time. And so because of attendance, they had to stay home. Like all of these things that are deeply personal and feel like it's our, sole responsibility, going back to thinking about this rugged individualism, when it's as a community, our responsibility to take care of our friends and our family and our neighbors and our friends and their kids. And so, but we don't say what the problem is. And so then we don't know that half the people in this room can't afford, their car or their electricity bill. And if we all knew that, then that sounds like a different story, right? And it sounds like something that we can work together on and figure out, like, so why is electricity so high? Where's the problem with that? Instead of saying, I just can't pay my bills because I'm a loser or whatever. And so I think if we can figure out, I won't even say figure out, because I think I think collectively enough folks here in this room, on this panel, but also just at Netroots in general, I've heard it before. I've heard people, we have sort of figured it out. We know that we have to have these deep conversations. We know we have to do it for years to come. We know we have to do more listening and less telling people what their problems are. We know these things. We know that redlining and urban development cause a tourniquet around cities economically and cause all these spaces to become the hood or the ghetto or what have you. And the same thing happened in the rurals. We know this, but where do we find the fuel that gets us moving so that we can fix it? Because Democrats ain't gonna fix it, Republicans not gonna fix it. And those who are out there who also see it, that are doing something, they're doing something to make it worse. And so it's a matter of how do we change how we even function as organizations to be able to do something great before there's nothing left for us to even salvage.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Gwen, are you ready? You're doing a lot of work around media structures. Who's saying what through what channels? And so would love to hear you talk about what you're learning and what you're seeing about how do we work with the algorithm? How do we work with traditional media to both spread our messages as a part of our longer narrative project, and also to disrupt a lot of the mis and disinformation that's shaping a lot of the culture that is what Adrian was saying about, like, the talking points that people are regurgitating, that like that surface level agita that people have that's being fed by mis and disinformation. How do we work with the algorithm to get in the way of that?
Oh, yeah, I don't know. No, so in and this is not unique to the rural South by any means, but we know that we have a big media infrastructure problem. If we hadn't been knowing that, we definitely know that after this last election. And what's happening in small towns in the rural South is that the newspapers are closing. They've closed. We're past that. They've closed, or they've consolidated. They've been bought by a conglomerate, and they have like one reporter who's covering 5-6 counties. They're just stripped down. They're very bare bones. They're publishing maybe once a week, if there's anything at all. Then you have, a sort of a TV news infrastructure that is a little healthier, but it's not deep reporting, but it's widely consumed. But when you get up into Appalachia, one of the people can get that news But the news can't really be sent out of those places. Like literally, I would be working at Down Home, North Carolina, and something would be happening up in the hills of Watauga County, and the news reporters would be like, well, that's cool, but we don't get a broadcast signal there, and we also can't get our trucks in there. So, thanks for letting us know, And so it's with TV news, it's like you can't really get the stories out as much. And what's happening, and then has anyone here ever tried to run digital ads in rural places? Yeah. I mean, it's just a shit show. I did this for a really long time trying, and I'm like, sometimes you just kind of can't hit enough. You can't hit enough households. So you find out that you're running your like soil and water commissioner ads in like Tennessee because like the computers are just like reaching and trying to find a signal somewhere. And it's really, really difficult. And so the result is that, this big vacuum has been created. And from my experience, the only people who have even bothered to think about filling it is the right, and not even like the regular right, but like the far right. There's a guy named Chad Nesbitt, do not look him up, in the mountains of North Carolina, who runs a really robust Facebook page as a news source. And what he's doing is he is reporting on things that people cannot get from anywhere else because there are not local papers, there's not local radio, there's no other infrastructure. And so he's reporting on traffic congestion, which does happen in rural places, y'all. He's reporting on high school sports scores. Shit you want to know, but then every like fifth post, every fifth live stream or something is some weather modification that happened during Hurricane Helene. And so regular people who are just trying to get information are going and being brought in, and then they're getting extremist talking points and conspiracy theories fed to them. And we've just done next to nothing to counteract this. There are possibilities though. I've seen some really small scale local publications, people starting a county-based blog where they're filling in that gap, and they'll get readership because there's literally no other place for people to be turning, and people are very hungry for news. Starting a county-based TikTok. There's groups like Beacon Media in North Carolina, which I work with, who are actually trying to partner with local newspapers by creating a progressive newspaper opinion column syndicate. And so we've got, I have a syndicated column, et cetera, that we're sending into all 100 counties of North Carolina, and we're getting progressive content picked up in these local papers. They're happy to take it. They don't always love what I've said, but they're happy to fill their pages, and they will often print a counterpoint. And I'm thinking, game on. That's exactly what we want to do. But we're not just dismissing these conservative small town papers. We're actually saying, can we help you? We see that you've got one part-time reporter. Can we help you? And that's just a different relationship. And then another thing that we don't have from our bigger publications, our national publications, or even our state-based publications, is there's rarely a rural reporter. There's rarely a working class reporter. There's rarely a labor reporter. And these things that really, really matter, there's nobody to turn to. Sometimes you'll have, an education reporter that you can access, but there's really nobody paying attention, and they're all stripped down so far at this point too that they're not traveling into places. And if they are, they're on a tight timeline, and they're going in and looking for the story that they've been assigned. They're not going in to ask people what the story is, which brings me to my second point that I think is happening with our media infrastructure, is that we're trying to message into places instead of message from places. It's like we lack any curiosity, and we're only here to try to persuade and fix people who we think are thinking wrong, instead of figuring out all the smart ways that they're thinking and the smart ways that they've been pulling things together for decades now of divestment and the lessons that they have to teach us. So a lot of progressive organizations, and I was a comms director for many, many years, will take national talking points and then just sort of be like, oh, like, how do we fix this for our communities? And then put money behind them and dispatch those talking points in. It's like, in the South, I always joke that it's like, people are like, well, can't you just use this and put like y'all on it? It's like, build back better, y'all. Like, how did we not win? But instead of trying to like send messages in, what does it look like to go and be in places and find out who the communicators who already exist in these towns are, and actually put support and sink, whether that's training or just money, behind local people? That's another thing that Beacon Media, who like I don't work for, I'm just going to like mention 1,000 times. That's another thing that Beacon Media is doing, is they're asking, who is already trusted in these towns? Who are people already listening to? And how can we lift them up and just give them a little like structure and oomph and editing power, honestly, behind them? So I tell the story a lot about this woman named Stevie in Shelby, North Carolina, where I was trying to find people for Beacon Media to work with. And I was like, I've met this woman. I really liked her. And I thought I might go and ask her who locally I should be talking to, maybe who already is writing. And I met her for coffee, and then we walked around downtown Shelby afterwards. And we walked for probably 45 minutes. And in that 45 minutes, she was stopped 5 times by people downtown asking her questions, about something that just happened on the school board. I didn't quite catch what it was, asking her if she was going to be someplace, asking her if she knew anyone who did, tree removal, I think was one. And I was like, everybody already knows this woman and everybody already sees her as a resource. This is exactly who we're looking for. So now she's a writer for Beacon Media. Not only is she published regularly with a column in her local, in the Shelby Star, but her column is also syndicated and gets picked up across the state. And so, but to do that, we have to rethink, like, what do we call an influencer, right? Stevie does not necessarily resonate with where I live, but she absolutely resonates in ways that I'll never resonate where she lives. Yeah. And so we have to say that in some towns, somebody with 500 people following is absolutely an influencer, and that's incredibly important to invest in and not cast aside. It's not always looking for some star, and what viral is in a small town is absolutely different. But we're trusting them. We're not just handing them our talking points and being like, Stevie, build back better, y'all. We're saying, Stevie, what are people talking about here? And she's telling me, it's about soil contamination after Hurricane Helene. And this is what she needs to talk about because Shelby's located in like a watershed where all the water came down from the floods. So these are the sorts of things that we need to like reevaluate and relook at that are really hard, because sometimes I'm not, or not sometimes, we're not looking to get our pieces published in the New York Times. But I'm very interested in things like what Courier News is doing in a state-by-state strategy, where in Pennsylvania, they're talking about bringing back a coupon circular and distributing a coupon circular in print that like my column could run alongside of. That's the creative stuff. That's not like hot, right? Like that's not like the sexiest place for my column to get placed, but that's absolute gold and absolutely where I want to be. And you have to rethink like what's flashy. The last thing I'll say is in rural places, don't sleep on radio. We drive everywhere and we lose signal all the time. Like I have my like Lucinda Williams PlayStation. Sorry, again, I have a teenager. Station, and I lose it. I lose it at some point, and I turn to local radio. And most people in rural communities are commuting 45 minutes to an hour and a half to get to work, and so that's like 2.5, 3 hours of listening time every single day. And if we don't start thinking about like where people actually get their news, it's not all digital, it's not all online. We're just like missing an audience, and we're seeding it to the right.
Yes. Woo, damn y'all. Thank you, Gwen. Thank you, Erika. Thank you, Rinku. Thank you, Adrian. Before we close out, can I just get a show of hands? Who here is from a rural place?
Hell yeah.
Beautiful. Who here is organizing in rural places? Amazing. I want to invite a round of applause for our panelists and for y'all for the work that you're all doing. Talk to each other. Come talk to us after. Let's keep this conversation going. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you out there.
Just before everybody leaves, I just want to make an invitation, something to tangibly take away. There are lots of ways you can get involved with any of our organizations and our work, but the invitation is this: to leave this space and be radically curious, right? So not, tell me why you voted this way. Tell me why you believe what you do. Help me understand, how did you get to this place? To really, really like open up our minds to radical curiosity. We'll find the answers. We'll find the answers together. But again, we have to be there asking that question, not just of people that we don't agree with, but of ourselves too, right? It's that binary of good and bad. We operate within it too. But I'm looking at my friend Heather Booth, who I was once talking about, this hero-villain narrative. And Heather, I think you asked me, well, who's the hero in the story? And I said, we are. We are the hero in this story. And so just a charge to go out and be that.
There you go.